the Montana rental agreement. In this video, we will tell you about the most noteworthy aspects of rental agreements in the state of Montana. What is a rental agreement? A rental agreement, or a lease, is a document that outlines the arrangement between two parties regarding a property rental. The one who's paying rent is called a tenant, while the owner of the property, who lets the other party use it under certain conditions, is called a landlord. The parties may also be called a lessor and lessee. Typically, a rental agreement lasts for 6 or 12 months, with rent being paid every month or every week. There is one federal disclosure that works for all lease agreements in the United States. This is called the lead disclosure, and it requires the landlord to tell the tenant about all known lead paint hazards. They should also provide the state-approved version of the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. However, this requirement applies to not all types of residential dwellings. Apart from the above-mentioned disclosure, the landlord should also disclose to the tenant the names and business addresses of the people who own and are authorized to manage the rental unit. One more disclosure the landlord should provide before entering into the rental agreement with a prospective tenant is a separate written statement as to the present condition of the premises intended to be let. Along with that, the landlord is also responsible for including the mold disclosure in the lease agreement, specifying that the mold testing took place in the building and the tenant can familiarize themselves with the results of the test. The disclosure should also state that the tenant can hire a qualified inspector and make the decision about the rent upon getting the results of the inspection if it wasn't done before. Security deposits. According to the Montana Annotated Code, the maximum security deposit is completely up to the landlord. The landlord should return the security deposit within 10 days after the termination of the tenancy via mail, provided there is no damage to the premises caused by the tenant. If there are damages, the deposit should be returned within 30 days after the termination of the tenancy, or a surrender and acceptance of the premises, whichever occurs first. The landlord can use the deposit to pay unpaid rent, or repair any property damages caused by the tenant after conducting an inspection for damages on the premises. If the landlord fails to return the security deposit, they remain liable to the tenant for the amount due the tenant. Landlord access. The Montana laws require the landlord to send at least 24-hour notice to the tenant, notifying them about the intent to enter the premises to inspect it, make necessary or agreed repairs, etc. Only emergency cases don't require sending a notice to the tenant. Termination of agreement. In case of month-to-month tenancy, at least a 1-month notice prior to the termination date is needed by either the tenant or the landlord. In case of week-to-week tenancy, at least a 7-day notice before the termination date is required by either of the parties. Notices for non-payment and non-compliance. If the tenant fails to pay rent, the landlord should send at least a 3-day notice to the tenant requiring them to pay or to vacate the premises. If there is another breach of the rental agreement, such as keeping unauthorized pets or persons, at least 3-day notice is required from the landlord by Montana law. If the same act of noncompliance recurs within 6 months, at least 5 days notice should be sent to the tenant.